Hey guys, Kyle here with the Mortgage Celebrity Studio. I'm here with Justin Keiper from Cantelmi Funeral Homes. Now, first time ever having a funeral director on here, probably the last time, but
Right.
you were I guess, hot to pass up. I mean, everything that you're doing seems really cool, and you were recommended by a friend. So first of
Yes.
all, thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
How does one get involved in the funeral business?
So when I was 15 years old, my great grandmother had passed away. First experience I ever had with death, especially for someone close to me. I remember being at her funeral and we're, getting ready to leave to go to the cemetery. And I said to my parents, I think I want to be a funeral director. And, obviously we're in the procession going to the cemetery and they're like, yeah, that's really weird that you're talking about that right now. I'm like, okay. So, a few, weeks passed and stuff. And I said to them, I really think this is what I want to do. I'm like, I remember the funeral director from the day of everything they did to help our family. And like, I just thought that was so special. And, I knew I never could do a job that was like a 9 to 5 desk job. Like that's just not who I am as a person. So prior, there were other things I was considering, but I was like, I really want to follow this and see where it goes. So I called a few funeral homes, shadowed, because, the day of you only see what anyone would see when they walk into a funeral home, but we all know there's more that goes on behind the scenes. So I shadowed embalming, went to the mortuary program at Northampton, and I just fell in love with it. I love to help people, and that's really why I do it. I tell my families that I serve, I treat them as if they were my own because that's what I would want,
Yeah.
if I was going through it. So it's a lot. It's a calling for sure. I have moments where, I think to myself, what did I get myself into or what am I doing? But at the end of the day, I remember how these families feel. And that's what makes it special.
Did you ever meet that person, that funeral director, after the fact, or
I have.
you
Yeah.
have?
Yeah.
Did you
So
tell them that they're the reason?
They are, yes. And they know that. And it's crazy because they're one of our like main competitors, if you want to so say that. I think for funeral homes, there's really no competition because there's plenty to go around,
Yeah.
unfortunately, in the Valley. But yes, I have seen them since.
It's funny because a lot of people today, I think in my generation, our generation, when we talk about business and, you have, like we had another mortgage loan officer from a different company on this podcast. I think the same thing. There's plenty to go around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rising tide lifts all boats. So I think the more competition there is, the better. It keeps everybody honest.
Right.
But at the same time, we don't have to hate each other.
Correct. Correct. And I think like that's my hope of like being this next generation of funeral directors in the Valley is really doing that with the other funeral homes. We're all here to help each other. If something ever happened, like COVID was a prime example of it, like, not only were hospitals and medical facilities, overwhelmed, so were funeral homes. And, we were kind of the people that no one knew about. We were what some would say like the silent like heroes behind the scenes because we were dealing with a lot of it at the same time. And we didn't have the, additional resources, the additional PP. We didn't get any of that. So funeral home to funeral home, we had to help each other a little bit. But you still had that, some of the old school mentality is, oh no, like you're the guy down the street, we know what we're doing. And, I just think that, like you said, there's no competition with it. Everyone at the end of the day for a funeral home, they either go where their family went or they go somewhere because they know that person there.
Or it's close.
Or it's close by. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's interesting. So 14 years ago, you had that experience,
Yes.
or not 14 years ago, when you were 14 or 15? You said?
I was 15.
15.
Yeah.
So you were 15, grandmother passes, you realize that this is your calling.
Yes.
And what sort of schooling does it
Goes
take
into it.
for a funeral director in Pennsylvania?
So in Pennsylvania, there's 2 mortuary schools. So you have Pittsburgh Institute of Mortuary Science out in Pittsburgh, and then Northampton Community College. Obviously, me seeing all my friends going off to school, I said to my parents, well, I want to go to the one in Pittsburgh. So, they entertained it. They're like, go out there, visit it. So we walk into the school out there and, they have a little bit like of your information already. And they said to me, you're from Bethlehem. I said, yeah. And they're like, well, why are you here? And I'm like, I don't know. That's just, I thought this is where I want to go. And they're like, you have the best program in your backyard for this. And I'm like, It's all I needed to hear, and looking back, it was the best decision I ever made.
Yeah.
So it's a 2-year program, obviously. After the 2 years, you serve an apprenticeship at the funeral home for a year. You have so many embalmings that you need to do, so many funerals you have to direct and run. Submit that all to the state. You take your national exam and your state exams, and then you can
Wow.
get your licensure.
That seems
So
like,
it's a lot, a lot
yeah.
more goes into it than people think. But I think at the end of the day, it should be like that because what we do is a lot sometimes.
Yeah.
It's even when I first started, I will never forget the first day at the funeral home and my first night on call. I got called out like 4 times throughout the night. And every time I would wake back up, I'm like, again, what did I get myself into? And
Yeah.
like, is this really what goes on? Because again, you only know as much as if you lost someone, you call the funeral home, that's it. But you don't think of the people that are doing all the work behind the scenes for it.
So when someone passes,
Mhm.
where does your job start?
So when someone passes, normally, if it's, nursing homes are primarily, a nurse from the facility will contact us, let us know, Mr. Smith passed away. His family would like to use your services. At that point, we reach out to the family, get their permission to bring their loved one in our care. Um, Go out to that place of passing, make the transfer to bring them back into our care, and then we set up a time to meet with the family, talk about the arrangements they'd like to do, coordinate services. So it really starts as soon as that person passes away, and it's not done until they're either cremated or they're buried.
And hmm, is it, I guess back in the day, I don't even know. Is it more cremations today? Is it more
Yeah, I
burials?
mean, I think the Lehigh Valley is still a pretty traditional area. I mean, I think we all know there's a lot of churches
Yeah,
around here, and there's
a
more
lot.
churches that keep coming up. So we are still very traditional here. Some of my friends who are funeral directors, like in more of like the cities like Philadelphia or New York, wherever it may be, it's a lot more cremation. Cremation is definitely a little more popular now. I think it's just the ease of people think it's easy. It's one of those things where families are spread out. They're not all in the same area anymore, and
Hmm.
people need time. So people have someone cremated and they do a service a month later, or some people do it a year later. It can be at any point where traditional services with a viewing, it's normally the third or fourth day after they pass away. So it's a little quicker.
Interesting. So is there any, I have so many questions. Is there anything that people should know? I guess what would you tell people like before they lose a friend or before they lose a family member? Like, hey, just be aware of like this, or this is a question you should ask
Hmm.
your like if it was a buddy in Arizona who's not
Sure.
going to use your services, what do you tell? Like, for example, like I have somebody reaches out to me,
Hmm.
they're buying a house in California. I'm not
Right.
licensed in California.
Sure.
I'm going to tell them the 9 questions to ask the mortgage
Hmm.
loan officer to
Hmm.
make sure they're getting a good service.
Right.
What's that for your business?
So I think for us, it's really understanding, first of all, what your loved one wants, what their wishes are. A lot
Mm,
of people don't know that. Now, if it's something that was unexpected, and I feel like that's where I've run into this scenario a few times because
yeah.
people will reach out and they're like, we were on vacation and, dad passed away or a brother or whatever it may be. And they're always like, we don't know where to start. If somebody passes away outside of the state, but they're ultimately going to be buried here, we would still be that funeral home for the person. We coordinate with a funeral home in the other state then to
Hmm.
coordinate bringing them back here. The family doesn't have to do any of that. They'll just give us the information. They'll work directly with us. We contract that other funeral home to assist us there. But I always tell people, I'm like, knowing what your loved ones want is the most important thing. It doesn't need to be set in stone, but it's just a little bit of a conversation.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to talk about it,
No.
but it's one of those things that you're all going to experience at some point. Um, I think since COVID, it's gotten to be a little more conversational funeral service. I also think you have more of these, they call like my generation millennial morticians. We're kind of the ones that are on social media. We're doing more of the behind the scenes, what it's like to be a funeral director. And it's
Yeah.
just making it more transparent because at the end of the day, people should know what we're doing, and we don't hide anything. There's nothing to hide. We're very upfront with our families. So I think it's just realizing what your loved one wants and also the financial part of it is a big thing. People aren't prepared for that, especially if it's unexpected. So
Yeah.
it's have life insurance or prepay at the funeral home, whatever it may be, but kind of have some idea of what you may want, when that time comes.
What is it cheaper to get cremated?
It is.
Yeah, that's what I figured because
Yeah.
it's just less. I mean, you don't have to buy a plot.
You don't have to buy a plot, but that's the other thing that people don't know with cremation. You can still bury the urn,
Oh, true.
because a lot of people back in the day, like probably like our grandparents or great grandparents, cemetery plots were sold like for the family. So they just bought them. So many families, they're like, oh, well, dad just want to be cremated, but we have 10 plots at the cemetery. And I'm like, well, his urn can be buried there with the rest of the family. If you don't want to keep it at home, it can be buried there. And I always try to, I don't want to say push for that, but push for it a little bit because you never know what could happen. There could be a house fire. There could be, the other spouse passes away and nobody knew the urn was in the closet or wherever it may be,
Yeah.
So I'm like, having that place of rest is very important. Not necessarily that you have to go to it, but also for like years down the road, like people can walk through a cemetery and they're like, oh, look at this man, or look at this woman. So I think it's just education. And I think that's what my generation is trying to do right now is just educate people on what all is out there, what options there are for funerals, and really make it more conversational
Yeah,
and laid back.
I didn't know there was a funeral director under the age of 50 until I met you.
Yeah,
Because,
yeah,
I mean, every time that I've been to one, it's always like I can picture everyone that I've met,
correct.
like in my head and what I think they look like. But
Yeah.
that's why I was fascinated to talk to you because, like, what is the new generation of funeral directors? What are you guys showing or what are you guys doing that maybe seems faux pas to like the
Yeah.
previous generation?
So I think the biggest thing right now is so when you think of a funeral home, it's a lot of them are family owned.
Yeah.
It's all family members that work there. When I graduated mortuary school, there were probably 6 students in my class that came from a funeral home family. The rest of us all just decided this is what we wanted to do.
That's crazy.
Now, sometimes, just like any family business can be, the next generation comes into it just because it's part of their family legacy.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't really have the heart in it to do whatever it is. So I think for the generation, this next generation of funeral directors, we're the ones being transparent. We're the ones being honest. We're the ones, out there in the community, whether that's through social media, through TikTok, whatever it may be. That's where I feel like our audience is now. I mean, it's for any business, it's like a podcast. It's the same thing, it's like people have already said to me, why don't you start a podcast at the funeral home? And I'm like, I don't really know who would watch it. I don't know who would come, but somebody would. And it's just breaking down those barriers for people. But I think for me, I'm still kind of old school a little bit, especially when it comes to a funeral home, that having that home is the most important part. You want people when they come in to feel very welcomed. You want them to be relaxed. You want them to feel like they're in your home. They can, have the space to do what they need to do, to grieve, whatever that may be. Because you do have some corporate funeral homes nowadays as well. And there's a difference. You can feel the difference.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that people are, get the warm and fuzzy when they come in, even though nobody wants to be there to begin with.
I didn't know that there's a corporate side of this, but it doesn't surprise me because, I'd recently dealt with losing a pet, and we took our dog to a couple different vets, and we ended up at like a family vet.
Right.
And we found out that was probably the best decision we ever made because there was like corporate vets, and the family vet took a lot off our bill because of something that happened, whereas a corporate one definitely would never, done that. But so is there like one corporation buying up all these funeral homes?
There's like 2 big corporations right now that are buying a lot of, funeral homes that, if the next generation, that family didn't want to come into it, they're buying those. They're buying cemeteries. I mean, again, we're fortunate in the area. We have one corporately owned funeral home. Cemetery, there's a few more. But you see the difference. People see the difference, and everyone knows it. So I think for me, again, it's just keeping that home is very important. And that's the thing. Some funeral homes, like they'll change and they're like, just funeral service, funeral services. And I'm like, it's a home. People want to feel at ease when they come in. And, for a lot of families that follow the legacy where their family always went with funeral homes, They go there because they're comfortable there. Whether it's the building, the location, the people that work there, whatever it may be, they're going there because they feel like it's a home. And that's what people want.
I never really thought about that, but every funeral that I've been to, it is very homey. Like
It is.
it's
That's
like
what you
walking
want it
into a
to
living
be.
room.
Correct. And
Yeah.
that's what you want it to be. Now, granted, there's some that, nowadays have to be updated a little bit to come with the times. But I also think like how it would be for like someone buying a home, like you have homes that have, that beautiful architecture. And then you have these like cookie cutter homes now where everything looks the same. And like modern sometimes can feel very cold.
Yeah.
And people say, when you're remodeling a funeral home, it goes into like the colors you choose. You want warm tones. You don't want the cool tones because, again, that makes it feel cold.
Yeah. That's interesting. So is there like a mafia type of like families that run I just, it surprises me that only 6 students out of the class were from families that
Right.
ran funeral homes because in my naive thinking, I would just think that like, no, son, you're going to go to school to do this because this is what daddy did and this is what grandpa did.
So, and I think it's because, that generation growing up around it, you see the sacrifices that are made. As a funeral director, when we're on call, it's 24/7. You can get a call anytime. You may have to leave, whether you're at a wedding or a function or an event, whatever it may be, you may have to step out. You may have to make some phone calls or you actually have to leave, go somewhere else, whatever that may be. So I think that generation, saw what maybe their like father or grandfather sacrificed.
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't know if I want that, and it's understandable. It is a lot. And again, it's my first year at the funeral home. I thought to myself, I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I loved being with the families and I loved what I was doing, but I'm like, on the outside, it took me a while to find that balance and make that balance because families, especially with cell phones nowadays, they'll call, they'll text any time of the day.
Yeah.
And they don't think anything of it.
Yeah.
So it took me probably like a good 8 years in to really find my like boundaries with families, but say it in like a polite manner because you don't want to just be like, hey, I'm not working right now, I'll call you tomorrow. Like they don't want to hear that. And I'm like, if you text me, I will always answer. And maybe it'll just be, I'll have to check on that tomorrow. Or, if it's a quick answer, I'll answer them. I don't mind doing that. But when you go on vacation, people still reach out. It could be a family you served 2 years ago. They save your number because you did something that was so meaningful to them. And they know like, hey, I could just text you if I have a question. And that's fine. I will always get back to you, but maybe not right away. So I make that known from the beginning now. Whereas before, they could text me at 2 a.m. I would wake up and text them right back just because like I felt like, oh, I have to do this. You know what I mean?
That's so relatable because in my business,
it's the same way.
You're buying a house.
Yep.
You have 30 days from the time you sign the contract to close. Sometimes it's longer if you're building a house. But when they have a question, I got a text, no kidding, 5:59 this morning.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was up, but out of principle, I don't respond at that time because I'm setting boundaries.
Correct.
And I think by the time our generation gets older, there will be social boundaries that doesn't get broken anymore.
Yeah.
But for now, people are still trying to figure that out.
Correct.
But it's crazy to me that you have to deal with that. I wouldn't even have thought about that because
I mean, people reach out like not even text, Facebook. Like Messenger is a big, like I've already gotten someone like through Messenger, my dad passed away. And I'm like, this is how you thought to reach out to me.
That's what I was going to say.
But
like,
they look at it like they know that they want to work with you. So whether they don't still have your number or whatever it may be, or it's people that I met like at an event in the community and I'm only connected with them on LinkedIn or, Facebook. I don't have their number. They don't have mine.
Yeah.
Someone died and they're like, hey, I remember meeting Justin at this happy hour or whatever it was. I want to use him because now I need a funeral director. So they reach out that way and it's fine, but it's also like scary sometimes because I'm like, well, if I don't see it, you know what I mean?
You kind of always have to remain connected.
So like I always tell people whenever I meet them and same thing like with my business cards, like it's the funeral home number because no matter what, you can call the funeral home, you can ask for a specific director if you want one. That director that's on call that night will make sure, we bring your loved one in our care. And then I'll follow up in the morning, so that's just the safest way to go about it. But it is hard, the boundary thing, because they're emotional. So like, I just feel like they're texting you what I think is the simplest question, but to them, it's like they're probably sitting there waiting for your response, you
That's so
know?
true.
So I don't mind the text. The calls
Yeah.
I really have a bigger boundary with. Texts are easy for me, but
I'm kind of the opposite. Like I'll take a call at 8:30 at night. The text I have to sit there and think about my response and
yeah,
word it in a way that's
yeah.
going to be correct and doesn't come off. So like
Right,
I
right.
like just having the quick call. Yeah, I'll answer that question.
Yeah,
Everybody's
yeah.
different though. But still, I had no. That's the most relatable thing about your job to my
Mm-hmm.
job is just
Yeah,
the people part of it
right.
and making people and setting those boundaries and
Mm-hmm.
like yeah, I understand you're buying a $500,000 house and this is the biggest transaction you're ever going to have in your
Right.
entire life.
Mm-hmm.
But 9:30 on a Saturday night is not the time to call me.
Correct.
Like
And
I
I
do
think
have a
people like,
family.
people that we deal with, they work, and they look at it like that. Like you're at work. Yes, you're at work right now, but
Hmm.
so are we,
Yeah.
but people don't think that way. And they're like, oh, I'm going to drop off the clothes for my dad's viewing, at 7 p.m. When I
Hmm.
get done work, I'm like, well, I've been there since 8 a.m. I'm not going to be there still at 7. And they're like, oh, well, when am I going to drop it off? So it's the same thing. And it's just like getting people to realize that. And a lot of times we have to meet people halfway. So I'm
Yes.
like, I'll come pick them up,
Yes.
whatever it may be. But it was hard for me to really set those boundaries. And every now and then I still struggle with it, but I've gotten a lot better. A
Well,
lot better with it.
you, when you first start, you're getting these clients, you want to make them happy, you become a people
Correct.
pleaser, and you're like, let's just do
And
it.
I was just nervous
Yeah.
because I was like, starting with a family business and not being part of the family, I always felt like I had to prove myself more. And
Sure.
especially like I'm working in the community I grew up in. So like a lot of the families that come in, like I may not know them directly, but they knew my grandparents or whatever it may be.
Hmm.
And so trying to like find that balance was hard for me because I just really felt like I had a lot to prove. And I knew that I wanted to make a name for myself.
Hmm.
And that's why I started doing a lot of the community work and going to, events and kind of immersing myself in that different aspect to really get out there and get my name out there. And it also helped me be more comfortable at work and more comfortable with what I'm doing. And it broke down that stigma of people saying to me like, oh my God, you're a funeral director? Like, I don't want to talk to you or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
It's just breaking down those walls and letting people know like we're normal people,
Yeah.
and some people say to me, you don't look like a funeral director. I'm like, what's a funeral director look like?
Yeah.
Whether it's someone that's older or like they think of like the Addams family, like that's not what funeral directors are. We're
Yeah.
people just like anyone else.
It's
But
fun. You don't want your funeral director to come up to you in like super happy tones, being like, "Hey, how's it going?"
yeah,
Like you
correct,
kind of want it
correct.
reserved, like.
You
But
really have to like read people well.
yeah,
But it's funny that you just said that. And, a lot of my close friends make fun of me when we're out. And if I get a call because they're like, oh, you have the funeral director voice on right now. I'm like, but we all have that. Like we all
have
have
our
the
sales
phone voice.
yeah.
Yes. Like, how you're going to talk to someone and funeral, especially when someone dies, like you are quieter, you are gentle,
Sure.
And one of my best friends, when she had, someone in her family pass away, she called me about it. And like, it's just natural. Like I get in that tone and she's
Yeah.
like, all right, drop the tone.
Yeah.
Like drop the tone with
She
me
knew
right
that you
now.
will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You mentioned earlier that some of the online stuff that you're doing
Yeah.
is about you guys being as transparent
Mhm.
and doing these things the right way, which made me think about like, were there things being done that weren't the best practices, or maybe
No.
a way
I think it
things
was
have changed?
Yeah, I don't think it was anything that was done wrong. I think for people, they just really never realized like me when I first decided to be a funeral director, I didn't realize really what embalming was and what went into it, what went into like the makeup, the dressing, the casketing, all of that. When we sit down with a family, people don't think that we do that.
I didn't think that
Yeah.
either.
So like when I sit with a family and they're like, oh, like here's the clothes. Can you please tell whoever's going to be getting mom ready? I'm like, well, it's going to be me. And people are more comfortable with that. And I just think it's just educating the public on really what we do, how we do things. Obviously there's some things that we don't want to share, but it's also like embalming. People think embalming is the most like invasive thing that you can do to someone. It's one little incision. That's all it is. It's a very clean process. Like,
What is it?
so all we do is we make one little incision right in, go into the carotid, and you drain out through the jugular vein. That's it. It normally takes anywhere from about an hour to 2 hours. but it's clean. We're not the ones doing autopsies. That's the coroner.
Yeah.
So people, they're always like, oh, do you glue their mouth shut? Do you glue their eyes shut? Do you stuff them? Or like, what are you doing to them? Like, you don't do any of that,
Yeah.
but that's what people think. And TV and internet, that doesn't help. But right now, there's a lot of funeral directors that are becoming more known on TikTok or on these social media platforms that are, kind of crossing the line a little bit, but in a good way. It's letting people, there's a funeral home that I know that just opened up. When they posted pictures of their new facility, they put pictures of like their morgue and their prep room. And
Hmm.
they're like, this is where, your loved one comes into. And they're like, it's clean. This is what it looks like, but it is sterile at the same time because it looks like an operating room in a sense.
Interesting.
But people, again, they don't know that.
No. No, I didn't know what embalming was. Like
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
I can picture a body and filled up with an orange or yellow liquid. Like that, I don't know,
Right.
so it's
Like people
interesting.
don't know what it is. So when you kind of explain it to them a little more, and it's the same thing with like as cremation's becoming popular, people don't realize you can have a viewing before the person's cremated. It can be a public viewing. We have what's called a ceremonial casket. So you don't have to buy a casket. It's like a rental.
Hmm.
Like there's a lot of different options, but people just don't know them. We do a lot of, pre-arrangement seminars. We have a funeral director who she specializes in that. She hosts what we call lunch and learns. So she hosts lunch at like a local restaurant,
Yeah.
especially where like older people like to go, like a diner or something. We invite people for lunch. They can ask questions, and it's just a relaxed environment to do it. Because again, nobody wants to come to the funeral home. And that's fine. We'll meet you wherever you want to be, and whenever you want to talk about it, we're there, and we'll answer these questions for you.
Yeah.
So it's starting to change a little bit. COVID really made the change, I think, because it pushed people to kind of be prepared a little more.
Is there a funeral home director conference? Like
There is.
there is? Where
Yeah.
is it at?
So it's somewhere different every year. So we have two organizations. So you have National Funeral Directors Association, which is national, and then each state has their own. Some break it down even to like areas. So like even here, like we have the Pennsylvania Funeral Directors Association, but then there's also the Eastern Pennsylvania Funeral Directors Association. So I've been fortunate. I went to the national convention a few times. You got a lot of looks, especially like when you're checking into the hotel and if that's where it's going to be in the convention center and it's all funeral stuff. But,
Yeah.
it's for us, like we can relate to that, So it's like you go and you look at hearses and caskets and new urns and new products that are coming out. But at the end of the day, we bring those ideas back to better serve our families, The celebration of life aspect is what's important nowadays. I think for me, being this millennial mortician and same thing of my generation, like we want stuff that's unique. You don't want a cookie cutter funeral. It's not this evening viewing, next day church service and the burial. Everyone does that. For me, I tell families, I'm like, listen, we can do that, but tell me about mom a little bit. Tell me about dad. And they'll be like, oh, like our dad loved to fish and loved to hunt. I'm like, great. I'm like, bring in like his fishing pole, like bring in like his camo vest or whatever it may be. And they're like, why? We'll just like make a picture board. I'm like, because it's so much more than the pictures. A lot of these people lived 80, 90 years. Like they did a lot in those years. Let's show that. When you walk in, I love nothing more than being able to look at pictures, memorabilia, whatever it may be, because that's the conversation for people. When we just have a casket or an urn and the family, it's so awkward. People don't know what to say. They don't know what to talk about. But as they walk in and they're looking at pictures or they're looking at a fishing pole or, a taxidermied whatever, it brings up that conversation like, oh my God, I remember when he did that. Like it just helps the people through their grieving process,
Yeah.
but they don't know they can do that, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, I think, I hadn't really lost. I mean, I've lost some people close to me when I was
Hmm.
younger.
Hmm.
But when I lost my dog, and I know this for some people who don't have pets may not relate to this, but it is a member of your family.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was really the first time I went through like a grieving process
Hmm.
as an older
Yeah,
person.
yeah.
But looking at those pictures when I was finally able to do that,
Yeah.
it changed everything.
It does.
You remember them in a nicer
Mm-hmm.
way than, the time when they were sick or whatever.
Right.
So I get what you're saying.
Yeah, and it goes as far as like I had a older lady who passed away, and she loved the Lifesaver mints. Okay. And like her daughter's like all she ever carried in her purse was mints. Like that's all it was. I said, bring her purse in and we'll get mints. And we got mints, and like by the guest book, we had her purse and it was filled with mints, and everyone grabbed one. But as they came in, everyone was like, yeah, that was Dolly, or that was Susie, whatever it was, so it's just those little things that go a long way with people, because that's what it's about. That's what funerals are about. It's not necessarily just the religious aspect of it. You're honoring that person. So like for me and this generation of funeral directors coming up, we really want to make it as personal as we can.
Well said. Where can people find you?
So, social media, I'm on all social media outlets. I do a lot of community work too. So
tell me about that. What are some of the stuff you do?
So for the community stuff, I serve on the board for the Heart Association, Cancer Support Community of the Lehigh Valley, and we actually do a grief group there as well. So they're Dream Come True of the Lehigh Valley, the chamber I was involved with for a little bit. So, really any of these organizations, because I just want to be out there to let people know that, like, I'm not trying to say, like, use me as your funeral director, but it's just like, I'm here to answer questions if you need to, because that's what people want. They want someone that's like, they can text and ask a simple question. Like you said, if someone died in another state and you just have a question, you're doing everything in that state, but you're like, I don't know where to start. You're the only person I know that does this, fine.
Yeah.
So like social media for me, like Instagram, TikTok, like I've started doing like postings about funeral service and relating like the real world to what we do and just breaking down those walls. So, all of my social media I'm on, and it's just my name on everything.
It's funny because I've had friends, really close friends, like buy a house, and halfway through the loan process with somebody else, they'll call me and they'll be like, hey, I don't understand what's going on. This is what's going on. And some people get mad. Why didn't you use me?
Right.
And it's one of those things where I don't get mad. I take it as a compliment that they actually called me, because they trust me. But number two, they don't see it the way that I see it. Like they don't know that my income directly comes from the loans itself, or if you do use me, they don't know I don't get a salary, that I'm only 100% commission. So I'm not going to take that out on them. But in the same way that you do your social media, it's not the work you do today, you're not going to see the result of tomorrow.
Yeah, correct.
It's an exposure that you're getting that is for the long term.
Correct.
So if you can help answer a question today, somewhere down the line it'll pay off.
Correct. And it's the same thing, like being at these community events, you never see funeral directors at them. I invite like the other young staff members. I'm like, come to these, come out to them. And they're like, for what? I'm like I know when I walk into an event, like if it's one of those when like people automatically have their business cards, I'm like, this is not it. Like I want a conversation.
Yes.
Like it's great to meet people and expand your network, but there's ways to do it. I love a conversation. I love to meet people that way. But again, I just want people to know that if you have a question, I will gladly answer it. I will never make someone feel like, oh, well, should have just came to me and you wouldn't have these questions or you wouldn't have these problems, because no one's perfect. Everyone knows what they're doing. Like I think every funeral director is special in their own way. Now, granted, I've heard some stories and I'm just like, oh, it is what it is, you know? And I try to help any way I can, but it was hard in the beginning when I had some close friends or even like distant relatives that I knew were going to another funeral home. But then I thought to myself, I'm like, it also might be awkward for them a little bit too, because them on a different level, so they don't want to maybe bring you into that sometimes. I just try to put myself in their shoes and I'm like, listen, if you need me, I'm here. If you don't, I will still help you. I'm not, just because you went across the street to a different funeral home, that doesn't mean I'm not going to come pay my respects. Like I have no problem doing that stuff.
And for me, it's like most friends of mine, if they don't use me, it's because they don't want me to know what their credit score is or how much money they have in their 401k. They may be embarrassed about it, or because it's too little or too much. They don't want their friends to know that.
Yeah, like there's a fine line sometimes, but it was like in the beginning, I would think to myself, like, I remember the first call I ever got from someone, and they're like, oh, so and so passed, but like, we're using this funeral home. I'm like, okay. I'm like, why don't you call them? I don't know why you're like asking me these questions, right? And my mom, like when I was telling her about it, she was actually the one, she was like, I don't think you should have answered like that. I'm like, but it's true because too, there's a certain part with funeral service where like each funeral home may be a little different in their procedures. So like I'm going to say what we would do, but I don't know what they may do. They may say this is how they do it or this is how their schedule runs. I don't know. So
Yeah.
it's like sometimes it is obviously best just to go to the source where you're going, but like little things in between, yeah, I'll
Yeah.
help you with. Or like if you're in that stage of, pre-planning or thinking about what you want for your parents that are getting older, or like I've had people ask me like, what are good nursing homes? I mean, it's anything like that. People, you don't go in nursing homes every day.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I didn't start doing it until I started working at the funeral home. But now I know which nursing home one day that I'd rather be in than the other one. You know what I
100%.
mean?
Yeah.
So it's like there's so many different levels to it. And I think it even ties back into with the community stuff when I meet people, like meeting you and, the people here in the office, it's like, hey, do you know somebody that does this? Do you know someone that's a hairstylist or mortgages or a realtor? Like you expand your network and can help them too, because a lot of times when someone passes, they're looking to sell their home. They're looking, to move away and they need movers or whatever it may be.
A
And they
lawyer.
look at you and I'm like, that's like the full service, not only we do the funeral, but like aftercare is a big thing for funeral service. That's why I started this grief group with the cancer support community, because I'm like, I want to continue to help people any way I can.
Yeah. That's a great message. And I think that's the two things that we have in common. Well, the mort, we talked about beforehand, mortgage. Right. It comes from the French term, which means death pledge.
Right.
But also the clients that we speak to today hopefully won't be calling us for a bunch of years.
Right.
Because people only buy a house every,
exactly
7 years to 30 years.
Yeah.
So Justin, thank you for coming in.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Conversation, and I'll probably have you back with more questions.
Sounds good anytime.
Yeah, they can find you, Justin Keiper, on all social medias. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to him.
Yeah.
Like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one, guys.